part of our sustainability workshop series, and we're really excited to be presenting this material and having some chance for some good discussions, having so many folks join. As with last time, um, myself, Julie Eben, and Sheila Krishnan are going to be our facilitators for today, and we'll be having a few guest grantee and alumni speakers who will be sharing some of their experiences as well, and we're really excited to have them join in a little while. Today's session, last time we talked about communications for sustainability with Misty Allen from the Nevada Office of Suicide Prevention, Greg Elliott from Adams State University, and we looked at the big picture worksheet. For homework, you hopefully got a chance to fill in that worksheet and discuss it with your peer partner site. Today we're going to start by seeing if there are any questions or reflections about the big picture process after going through it for all of your objectives. We're then going to look at using partnerships for sustainability. People sometimes get stuck on how to make sure that partnerships continue after the grant, how to get partners to take ownership of parts of the work so that it continues. So we'll focus on those aspects. And we'll also look at a process for prioritizing where to focus your sustainability efforts, including how to involve partners in those efforts. Wanted to make a couple of notes. Some folks asked, why last time focus on communications, this time focus on partnerships, and upcoming focusing on infrastructure development and supporting trainers for sustainability. And there are so many different aspects of sustainability that we could cover, and we wanted to focus it in a little bit. These were some areas that you and your cohort identified in the scan of grantee needs as being areas where you wanted technical assistance. So we wanted to focus on these aspects in particular. And also based on some of what you said in your registration. We do have grantees from different types of grants, from state and campus grants who spoke last time, and we'll be speaking again this time. We're going to use some examples of the worksheets from some tribal grantees, but hopefully, despite them being different types of grants, you're still able to see what some of the strategies are and apply them to your setting regardless of the grant type. So last time we covered steps 1 and 2 of this process, and today we're going to cover steps 3 and 4 and look at using partnerships for sustainability. And you might wonder how the communications and partnerships pieces fit into this model. And they really fit best into step 6, which is all the way over here, where you'll look at specific strategies to sustain parts of your work. But there are so many strategies that you could consider. We really wanted to give them the most airtime than just during the 3rd meeting. So we wanted to spread them out over all 4 meetings so you'd have more time for the examples and the ideas to percolate before figuring out what might work best for your site. Partnership strategies will also come into play in step 4 that we'll cover today, since you'll want to work with your partners on prioritizing in order to get their buy-in. I'm hearing a little bit of background noise, so I just wanted to ask folks to mute your lines by pressing *# or by muting on your phone until we get to the group discussion portion. Thanks. So last time we did talk about the big picture worksheet, and then this was a homework assignment to fill this out more fully and to talk with your peer partner about it. And I'm curious, in filling out this worksheet, how did it go and what was helpful? So folks can either raise your hand or speak aloud, and remember to unmute yourself by pressing *#, or feel free to chat into the discussion box on the left. What was useful, helpful? How did it go in filling out the big picture worksheet? I see that Lori Shawn Childs is typing. And while folks are thinking about that and responding, I'm also curious for those of you who were able to connect with your peer partners, your buddies, what was useful around that? It sounded like someone had tried to speak up before, but maybe you were muted. If you want to try again by unmuting yourself. So Lori typed in, for our program, by filling out the big picture worksheet, it gives us a real look at what we have, what we're doing, and where we need to go. That's great. I'm really glad to hear that. Other thoughts or reflections on either filling out the worksheet or on connecting with your buddy? Hopefully, if you haven't gotten to fill that out or if you haven't gotten to connect yet with your buddy, that you will get a chance to do so after this meeting. And if you are having trouble connecting with your buddy, feel free to get in touch with us and we can help troubleshoot. You know, it may be that we want to reconnect you with somebody else or that we know that they're on vacation right now or something like that. So
this is Rita Tybler. I have a question.
go ahead, Rita.
For some reason, I thought I had registered for all of them, but I must have just registered for last week, so I'm not seeing anything on the screen. Is there someone that could send me an email so I can log on to this, to whatever, you are showing something on the computer, correct?
Yes, yes. No, I'm really glad you asked that question. So when you registered, you did in fact register for all four at once. And Dominique is going to send you the link on how to get
Okay.
into the webinar today. Is there
Okay,
anybody
thank
else
you.
who, no problem. Is there
All
anybody
right, I'm
else
going to,
who is having that issue? Okay. So Casey, you said are you, it looks like you are on the computer. Are you not able to get into the audio? Actually, let me type in because you may not be able to hear. Oh, it looks like a bunch of folks were having this issue with registration. Dominique, maybe you can, okay, maybe you can troubleshoot. Okay, great. Glad to hear that, Casey. So it sounds like you're in. So a bunch of folks needed to register again. Okay. I apologize. I thought it was just one registration process. So we will definitely work on making sure that that is smoothed out for next time and or to let you know that you might need to re-register. It sounded like someone was speaking up just there.
Mike Shaw on mute. Oh, mute.
Oh, okay. I guess somebody was trying to mute. Okay, so it looks like hopefully folks are getting in. I'm going to move on to our our first worksheet for today, which is called deciding needs or what needs more work to sustain. And I'm not going to go into this in too much depth, but I just wanted to go over it really briefly. So basically, this is, if you had your to-do list of here's all your objectives, and you looked at it thinking, okay, which ones do we need to look at and figure out whether and how we're going to try and sustain them? This would just be a way of looking at that checklist. And so some of them may already, in fact, be on their way to being sustained and don't really need additional work. Some of them may not be meant to last beyond the grant, and some of them may not really be up and running yet, and so you are not sure whether you want to sustain it or not, but you kind of need to leave it on your list before you can decide whether or not to cross it off. So I wanted to just share this part of an example, and this is on the private pages, which you may have looked at from the Kiowa Tribe of Oklahoma. So these are 3 of their objectives, and the first one, establish Native community awareness events for suicide prevention, measurable improvements to community development and infrastructure. This is not embedded into their community yet, and so it's not sustained. They can't cross it off the list yet, but they have achieved it. You see in the right-hand column, a Dance for Life powwow is held each year along with a 3-on-3 basketball tournament, but these are supported solely by program funds, and then one of their partners would likely continue to host awareness activities. So this needs to stay on the list. They need to figure out, okay, if this is a priority to sustain, and we'll talk a little bit about prioritizing later, how are we going to sustain? The second objective on here, reaffirm and continue the Area Teen Suicide Prevention Task Force. This one, they have said, yes, this is sustained. The task force meets regularly, even if KTSP, Kiowa Tribe Suicide Prevention Program, which is the GLS grantee, were not the host, that the meetings would still occur. So basically, when they're trying to figure out what do we need to work on for sustainability, they can cross this off their list. This is done. This is check mark. We're good here. With the third objective, establish a suicide survivor support group. This is not yet embedded into an ongoing effort. It's not yet sustained. And then in the right-hand column, this actually is something that they're still working on. At the time when they wrote this, they were still working on getting it up and running. So they couldn't yet evaluate whether or not to try and sustain it because it was still in the process of happening in the first place. Some other areas that I wanted to highlight is there may be an effort where it wasn't necessarily meant to last beyond the life of the grant. So for example, if you brought together a task force that was its sole purpose was to look at revising your community protocols for crisis response and postvention, and then they did revise them, you probably don't need that task force any longer. And so you can also cross that off your list. That wasn't meant to be ongoing beyond the grant. The last piece that I wanted to mention that where sometimes people get a little bit confused is training of trainers. So sometimes people say, okay, I'm doing a training of trainers, and therefore this is already sustained, it's done. I just encourage you to think about that that is not always the end of the line with that. Sometimes it needs more work in order to sustain, for example, gatekeeper trainings, where just because you have the trainers doesn't mean that that's automatically going to continue. And we will focus a bunch on that in our 4th meeting. But if you do have that as an objective, as you go through this worksheet, I would just encourage you to keep that on your list rather than crossing it off your list and saying, oh, we're all done. We don't need to work anymore on that. Are there any questions about this worksheet right now? I know I went through that a little bit quickly. All right, well, hearing none, I'm going to move on, but if you do think of some, feel free to type it into the chat box. I see Liz is typing. I don't know if that's a question or more in response to Sheila. Okay, great. So I am actually now going to turn it over to Sheila to talk a little bit about partnerships and introduce our grantee speakers.
Great, thanks, Julie. Hi, everyone. I hope that you are having a great Tuesday. I'm just going to get us started by talking a little bit about the importance of partnerships for sustainability as a strategy to ensure sustainability after the grant. In the reading before the first session, we introduced you to the Leaving a Legacy Sustainability Report that SPRC had put together last year based upon interviews with alumni grantees. And one of the 5 recommendations that came out of that was really cultivating partnerships to help you sustain your efforts after grant funding is over. And so I think a few of the things that really came out of the interviews and what people had said were to make sure that you have a diverse set of partners on board. I think often suicide prevention might fall into the responsibility of one department or a few individuals, but that it's important to really broaden the feeling of responsibility and share ownership with your partners, and also to think about non-traditional partners who could really contribute to moving your suicide prevention efforts forward. It's also important to make sure that you have a clear purpose and vision for the kinds of roles that your partners might have, and to think about the skills and resources that they might bring to the table. I think some of the interviews really indicated that partners were able to contribute to ongoing suicide prevention efforts in many ways. So sometimes they can just really assist in building buy-in throughout the community and reaching populations that they might have better access to. They can help to raise awareness about the programs to their target audiences, and they might even have resources to contribute that can take on pieces of your suicide prevention work as well. So thinking about what your goals are and what you want your partners to help you achieve and what they bring to the table as well are some really key pieces of developing partnerships in terms of sustainability. And then the last piece was often grantees develop coalitions or planning groups. You might call them something different, task forces or advisory boards or whatever. And I think those are often difficult to sustain sometimes after the grant, because if there's an individual who's helping to really coordinate those meetings or to keep it going, or if there's just turnover in general, I think those are some challenges, but oftentimes keeping the coalitions and the planning groups and really embedding them into the infrastructure of suicide prevention can help with your sustainability as well. So we're going to hear a bit more about how a few grantees have really been able to apply some of these ideas to the work that they've done in their settings. And I'm happy to first introduce you to Elaine Dimelo from New Hampshire, and then we'll hear from Jennifer Kennymore at Northwest Missouri State. And while they're talking, feel free to just type in any questions into the chat box, and then we can either address them as they come up or after each speaker is finished. And then after they're finished, we'll have a bit of a discussion as to, just reflecting on some of the strategies that they highlighted. So make sure to pay attention to what kinds of strategies they used and what made it effective, and then we'll reflect a bit together as a group to hear about what they said, or what you found that they said. So I will go ahead and hand it over to Elaine Dimelo.
Elaine, you may be on mute.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you for letting me share our experience with you. I'll give you a little bit of background. In New Hampshire, prior to there being any federal funding, any Garrett Lee Smith funds for suicide prevention. We had been working on doing suicide prevention and trying to do it in a comprehensive way, and looked at how we could bring all of the sectors of the community together in a public health approach. So we had started working with a number of different representatives, providers, people who came from different sectors of the community to write protocols so that we had them for everyone we could think of for prevention and postvention, including law enforcement, education, of course schools and campuses, faith leaders, social services, medical providers, mental health providers, and any other sectors of the community that might be key people in helping prevent suicide or working on postvention. And we developed protocols, kind of got everybody on the same page, vetted them against best practices and revised them again, and then turned them into training modules. And that became the Connect Suicide Prevention and Postvention program, which has since become a national best practice. And then our first Garrett Lee Smith grant came around, and we were funded in the first cohort. And many of the same sectors came together again, but at a leadership level. And we invited them to sign memorandums of understanding, asking them to be part of what we eventually formed was a Suicide Prevention Council, which would be to carry out the state plan, write a state plan and then carry out the state plan and get everybody again on the same page, implementing best practices across the board and utilizing the protocols that had been developed. And we were able to get representatives from, about 20 different agencies across the state, everything from, the AG's office to Department of Ed, Public Health, Bureau of Drug and Alcohol, Bureau of Behavioral Health, Domestic Violence, so on and so forth, all together, signing the memorandums of understanding, and then trained as many of their leadership as trainers in the Connect protocols in prevention and postvention. And then these departments, many of them rolled out the training and built in those best practices in a systemic way into their systems. So we had, like Division of Child and Youth and Families in terms of child welfare, instituting it throughout their system, so everybody was getting trained. Department of Juvenile Justice did the same. Department of Ed took the training on, and so it kind of filtered out into the community. Subsequently, we formed the Suicide Prevention Council and then had it legislatively mandated so that it was now going to be, again, sustained as a council that would continue to oversee the state plan and policies and procedures and implementation of best practices. And then we worked with, through a subsequent grant, worked with local coalitions that were, again, using the protocols in a regional and more remote way, and sort of being reinforced through the fact that many of them were tied to departments or systems that were that had been at the leadership level at the very beginning. Every year we hold an annual summit to get input into the initiatives in the state and input into revising the state plan and continuing to kind of keep that process alive. And in our current grant cycle, we are partnering with a number of different groups, but a key part of our development in this part of the grant is working with the regional public health networks, because they have recently reformed in our state and merged with the strategic prevention frameworks, where the substance misuse coalitions have kind of come in under the public health networks. And that's a really great infrastructure to continue to do our work, and the relationships, again, that we built years ago are many of the same people that we're now working with through these public health networks. And they, again, are continuing to implement protocols, training, best practices, and an overall sort of climate around suicide prevention and postvention. Another really key component and clearly relationship-driven is the loss survivor group, and we, over the years, have developed a very strong loss survivor network, and they have become a very strong body that has support groups. They do fundraising, they do advocacy. We have a speakers bureau, so they're great about getting out there and reducing stigma and increasing awareness. And one of the things that we did most recently in this last grant cycle is to actually establish a subcommittee of our Suicide Prevention Council that is loss survivors. And that, again, has been able to institute them in a sustainable kind of a way. So those are some of the key ingredients. In New Hampshire, again, we're a small state, so relationships are key, and a lot of the same people kind of cycle around, so we all see each other at different tables. But I know that even in large states, that happens on a regional level, so that often is important. And I think those memorandums of understanding in the very beginning and the fact that we got everybody on the same page with protocols really kind of helped us build common language and a common bond and understanding. You'll see on the screen is the copy of the MOU that we developed, and don't know if you can scroll down, but you'll see that there's, again, probably 19 agencies that signed it, and about 25 signatures representing those different agencies, starting with, Kelly Ayotte, who is now a senator and was representing the AG's office in New Hampshire at that time. So that, in a nutshell, is kind of some of the ingredients, I think, that have helped us with relationships and sustainability throughout the years. I'm happy to answer any questions or wait until later if that's a better time.
Great, thanks so much, Elaine. If people have questions for Elaine, they want to go ahead and ask now, feel free to jump in.
Elaine, this is Julie Eben at SPRC. I'm wondering if you can just say with the MOUs sort of roughly what it was that folks were agreeing to.
Yeah, the MOUs basically got all of these different organizations and departments to agree to be part of what became the Suicide Prevention Council, which at that time was not officially formed and not legislated. So it was a body of people who agreed to be part of the Suicide Prevention Council that would oversee the state plan, that would agree to implementing best practices and roll out some of the key goals in the state plan. And they are the ones who oversee that now and continue to meet on a regular basis and continue to revise the state plan and make recommendations. And under the SPC is a variety of committees who specialize in certain functions and tasks as well, including the newly formed Survivor Committee, Loss Survivor Committee.
Great, thank you.
See that Jennifer's typing. Give her a second. So the question is, by having one MOU, does it make it less complicated for state agencies to sign on?
Yes, I think so, because it was saying that everybody was agreeing to the same common understanding of how we were going to operate and what everyone was going to do. So it wasn't about each individual agency so much as all of the collective agencies together agreeing to work basically on a common, getting everyone on the same page again.
Leslie from Hawaii, aloha.
Aloha.
To you. And it looked like Julie had another question too. So you were able to, it seemed like you were able to embed your trainers and use a single curriculum within the state agencies. Is that right?
Yes. What we were able to do very early on in many of the departments that signed on was train trainers who were leaders in those departments who then utilized the Connect protocols and built them into their various departments and systems and continued to train their staff
and roll that out to a regional level. So in many cases, it created sustainability within a department, but the protocols and training are really designed not to just isolate one sector of the community from another. It's also to get them to all work together and look at how the handoffs occur and how people work collectively on a sort of a comprehensive public health kind of system for prevention and postvention.
Mm-hmm.
As leadership has changed, there's been times we've had to go back and retrain trainers, and there are some places where it's stronger than others, of course. But on the regional level, now that we're working with public health networks and we have worked with other coalitions around the state, we see that it continues to get reinforced at the local level as well.
It looks like there was another.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
I see Jennifer's question about how did we engage the domestic violence field. I should mention again, relationships are probably part of it. Working again in a small state and NAMI, New Hampshire, kind of taking the lead on this, we've already had a lot of interaction with many of these organizations at other tables. And so we did have a good working relationship with the New Hampshire Coalition on Domestic and Sexual Violence, and so invited them to be there, and we worked with them prior to the MOUs actually to write a protocol specifically for domestic violence organizations, which they helped us to write. So going back to the work that we did prior to the first GLS grant, having already engaged many of those organizations on a task level, and to say to them, help us write protocols for your agency around suicide prevention and postvention, I think led to keeping them engaged on a longer-term basis when Garrett Lee Smith grants came through, and we had funding to work in a more broad level. I think one of the things that we do when we do our training and when we talk to people is that we, again, through that public health model, often remind people that everything that they do is suicide prevention at some level. And so if you're doing domestic violence, you're doing suicide prevention. If you're helping somebody struggle with academic issues, you're doing suicide prevention. If you're helping someone stay sober, you're doing suicide prevention. You may not be thinking about suicide prevention at that time, but all of those different interventions at some level are the protective factors that help reduce risk for suicide. And when we get people to see how what their work does ultimately prevents suicide, I think the engagement and the commitment becomes much stronger.
That's great. Thanks. Thanks so much for sharing that. I think that's a really important point to recognize how there are a lot of people doing this work that don't necessarily consider it suicide prevention. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to our next speaker, Jen Kennymore from Northwest Missouri State.
Hello, everyone. Hope you're all doing well. This is Jen Kennymore. I am from Northwest Missouri State University in Maryville, Missouri. We have a pretty small, can you hear me okay?
Yep, you sound good, Jen.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure before I got into it too far. But we are located in the rural northwest corner of Missouri. We've got about 6,800 students. And as Elaine was talking, I'm like, I'll talk a little bit more about our advisory board, which was on a much smaller scale than what they've been able to do statewide. But yeah, so I'm at Northwest. I've been here for about 3.5 years. And when I was hired on as the health educator, suicide prevention was just part of that role. So my position was not funded through the SAMHSA grant that we had. So just keep that in mind. But with our SAMHSA grant, we were a part of Cohort 1 and Cohort 3. So we were very lucky to have 2 iterations of the grant. And from that, we were able to develop Project Hope, which is our campus suicide prevention program. And as the grant was kind of coming to an end, we really looked at developing an advisory board. Well, actually, we had an advisory board in place since the grant started in 2005, but we looked to them to really help us figure out how we were going to sustain our efforts. So I'll talk with you a little bit more about that. But as far as the history, like I mentioned, we started in October of 2005 with the advisory board, and this group today, it's about 10 to 15 people that are they're volunteers. They're not paid. It's something that they're passionate about, and they can kind of see how suicide prevention is everyone's business, like Elaine was talking about, and how they can play a role in that. So we're very lucky to have their support. But this group they've served as advisors and experts. They've provided that expertise to us throughout their time as a part of our advisory board. They also knew resources that were available both on and off campus, and had some really valuable connections that, to me, coming in closer to the end of our grants, was really helpful to build those connections. At this time, they are meeting on about a quarterly basis, just trying to sustain those efforts that we had during the life of the grant. So, which, with everything after our no-cost extension, ended in October of 2012. So we've been sustaining a few things beyond the life of the grant. So a few reasons why the advisory board has been successful and why we've been able to sustain it, and why we decided it was important to sustain it, is that we really wanted to continue that progress that we were able to make through the SAMHSA grant. And this group helped us stay focused on our main goals that were a part of Project Hope. And they also provided some really valuable feedback on the programming that we were doing. On the next slide, you can see kind of off to the left is a banner from one of our events, which was Live Your Life Week. And initially, my team had kind of brought up to the advisory board, we want to do something for Suicide Prevention Awareness Week. And the advisory board was like, well, how can we make it more positive? How can we focus on building resilience among our students? And that's how Live Your Life Week was born, just getting that feedback from them about that programming. This group has also really provided a lot of just overall direction for what we're doing with Project Hope. So we're very, very grateful for that. Another reason that it's really important to have an advisory board or some stakeholders that are on board is for that building and maintaining relationships, because as you all probably know, together we can have a greater impact. So through this advisory board, we've been able to have a pretty big variety of stakeholders, including quite a few from student affairs. So this includes residential life, campus activities, wellness services. We have our counselors and some medical staff that are on our advisory board. We also have talent development center folks, which are more tutoring and things like that. We have student support services through TRIO. And then we also have faculty from our psychology and sociology department, and they've been really instrumental in getting involved on the academic side. They've been able to infuse our online suicide prevention training into their curriculum for general psych and educational psychology classes. So that guarantees that about 90% or so of our students are actually getting that training now. So that was definitely a success that came from having them on board. And then we also have some students and interns involved in our group. So yeah, that's some important things that we've been able to do, and why we're very glad that we have an advisory board to turn to. As far as looking at sustainability, when we knew the grant was ending, we really asked the group, well, let's reflect on what we've been able to do over the life of the grant. What do we want to continue because it's been effective, it's been considered a best practice? Why do we want to continue that, and how are we going to do that? Because if the funding is running out, how are we going to continue those efforts? And that, by having those conversations, we were really able to create that buy-in and that continued support. And they were able to step up and say, we might not be able to give thousands of dollars from our departments, but if we each give a little bit, then we'll be able to go a lot further and still accomplish the goals that we've set forth as a group. Through those conversations, we were also able to get some recommendations. When we had the grant in place, we did have a graduate assistant. We had funding for a graduate assistant, and knowing that the grant was ending, we talked to the group, and their idea was to bring some interns on board. And we've been doing that now for almost 2 years, and it's a win-win all the way around because the interns are getting valuable experience for their future, and we're also able to continue a lot of our efforts. Like, we're still doing Live Your Life Week, and We have an event called the Stress Less Fest now, and they're able to help with those events and continue those efforts. So we were also able to continue providing lunch to our advisory board from commitment of our administrators, knowing that a lot of the people that are on board are giving up their lunchtime to come and support our efforts. So that we knew that providing that lunch was valuable to them because they were giving up their lunchtime, and our administrators stepped up and said we can help fund that. So overall, we've really found that having those stakeholders, those key players on board has helped with the success of our programming and the sustainability of that. So that's a little bit about our advisory board. So any questions would be great now or later.
You wrote in the beginning that they had to.
Great, thanks, Jen.
Yeah.
Feel free to type in. Everyone is, any questions come up. I see that Liz is typing in at the moment. Jen, I think you just briefly touched upon, I know that one of the things that you had mentioned to us before was about getting to the campus administrators to support the advisory board with a key piece. Could you say more about that?
Yeah. Once again, it really went back to those relationships that we had built during the life of the grant. And I talked to our VP of Student Affairs, who's my supervisor, and just said, how can Student Affairs help? And just wanted to guarantee that we had that buy-in from the higher level. And I think we're very lucky here that a lot of people realize the importance of continuing suicide prevention with or without funding. So I think conversations are essential. So
That's great. And it looked like Liz had a question about the online suicide prevention curriculum.
Yeah, it is something, it's called Ask, Listen, Refer, and it's something that I believe all of the campuses in Missouri have now, so you're welcome to look it up. But we do have a college version and then also a statewide version for Missouri, Ask, Listen, Refer. So. Yeah, it's Ask, Listen, Refer. I can try and type it in.
Jen, this is Julie Eben from SPRC. I was curious if you could say, you mentioned that the advisory board folks really saw the value of suicide prevention, and I'm curious whether there was anything that you did in particular to get them to realize the value of suicide prevention and to get them to want to continue as a coalition, or sorry, as an advisory board.
Trying to think. Well, for example, one person that's been involved for the long haul, I think she got involved way back when the advisory board started. She's the director of our residential life program, and she knows that what we're able to do through training and things like that, that's going to help her RAs, that's going to help her staff be more prepared to deal with potentially dangerous situations, dealing with suicide ideation and things like that. So she, once again, I think it's conversations and helping them realize what piece of the puzzle their department and they individually can tie into. So does that help?
Great. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Jen and Elaine, so much. It was really great information. I know that we have a couple of tribal grantees on the call as well. So Lori, I was wondering if I could call on you to actually share a bit about partnerships that you've all worked on. And you might be on mute, so you might need to unmute yourself. Sorry. Yep, Lori Shawn Childs.
Oh, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, good. What was your question now? I'm busy reading everybody's comments on the side over here.
Sure, no problem. I was just wondering if you might be able to share a bit about partnerships that you've worked on, just giving a tribal grantee perspective and how it's worked in your setting community.
Well, actually, we're really a small rural tribe. There's probably maybe 6,000 in our tribe, but not that many that live here. So what we have done is prior to receiving the grant, we worked on getting letters of commitment from the Family Resource Center, Social Services, the tribe, Law and Order, White Sky Hope Center, all of those departments who we thought would help us help the youth. And so those are all the folks that we work with currently. In fact, we have another meeting scheduled on Friday to see how we can further work together to bring youth maybe weekly here to help youth and families. So it kind of works out for everybody involved because ultimately we all have the same goal, and that's to work with the youth.
Mhm. Mhm. That's great. Thank you.
We do have established MOUs, MOAs, and a lot of times it's just a phone call. We call FRC and say, hey, you want to come over for a meeting on Friday? We're going to talk about youth. And then they kind of pass the word, and pretty soon we have a big group of people, and it works. It works for us. We're small, though, like I said, and we know everybody, and everybody knows us, so it helps. And it's different for me to listen to, like, the campus grants and the state grants where they have a big picture, where us here, we're local, rural, small, and everything we do, everybody else knows about. So we kind of collaborate on everything we do, which is good.
That's great, yeah, and I think one theme that has kind of come through for me through all the setting is just the importance of the relationships that you build. And I know, Elaine, you mentioned it before in New Hampshire that people often work with each other in different topics, perhaps, but the relationships do end up being really key to building the partnership.
Yeah, that definitely sets a foundation for working on other initiatives. I also think that when you, probably all of you have experienced this, when you went to write your grant, your Garrett Lee Smith grant, just engaging people right there was a wonderful educational process and an opportunity to educate them about suicide and suicide prevention and its importance. So many different ways to engage partners.
Great. So I just wanted to spend some time now. I know that there's several people from different grants that are logged on, and I know that many of you are working on partnerships, and so you might see the questions up on the Adobe Connect site. So we're curious to hear from each of you on what you're currently doing with your partners and what thoughts you have about who else you might need to bring in. And then if anybody has any kind of reflections on the strategies that you've heard described today and how those might work in your setting or how they might not work in your setting, anything like that, we're curious to hear about that. So feel free to type into the chat or just go ahead and unmute yourself, and you can share on the phone line as well. So as many of you who want to share about what you're doing with your partners and how that's worked, I think it's always helpful to hear what other people are doing.
Hi, this is Barbara Moser from UW-Milwaukee. Can you hear me?
Yep. Hi.
Well, I thought we'd mention a little bit about what we're doing with partnerships on campus here. Some of our strongest partners to date have been with university housing. So that has been a very key group. We don't have a large number of students who live on our campus. We have about 4,000 or 5,000, but they are a committed group, and they're here, and so we definitely try to strengthen that relationship both with trainings, training their RAs to be trainers for our Campus Connect suicide prevention program, as well as for outreach with mental health. And we also have formed a advisory committee on our campus where we have a membership from, I think, most of the key groups on campus, including Dean of Students Office, police, campus police, housing, the psychology department, faculty and staff from various different schools on campus, especially from their advisors network. Our Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs is on board. We have many of our both medical and counseling health center folks involved, as well as students, which I think is really important. I think one area where we're looking to strengthen our relationship is with our Dean of Students Office. We are collaborating on hopefully rolling out some trainings for faculty and staff this fall, encouraging faculty and staff to reach out to students in distress and giving faculty and staff tools to use in order to support them, including a website with materials as well as a resource folder, some guidelines that we developed for campus faculty and staff on reaching out to students in distress that has been approved or about to be approved by all of our 4 governance groups, including students. So I think that is something that will move forward in a positive way. I think the thing that I heard that I thought was helpful moving forward is that when we first wrote our grant, we had a MOU that we had many, many different departments on campus sign. And I think moving forward and being about a little more than halfway through our grant cycle, I think it would be really helpful in the next 6 months to bring all those people back together and to, at this point, say, hey, the grant's going to be ending in the next year or so. We would like your continuing commitment beyond the life of the grant and to be more proactive about it. And so I thought that, that would be that was a great suggestion in moving forward for us.
That's great. Thanks so much, Barbara. And I think that's a really great point, too, that sometimes your partners who you might need at the beginning of the grant or to help things started or implemented might be different than when your goal is actually to sustain the work afterwards. So maybe revisiting who your partners are and who else you might need to add when you have sustainability in mind. I think it's an important thing to do. And I see that Kathleen and Jennifer both added some comments as well about the campus providing space for the community partners to host events and how that will continue on as well. And then developing work groups that focus on each of the goals laid out in the strategic plan and having calls with each of the agencies. Great. How can you collaborate and engage? Sorry, I'm reading and talking at the same time. And is there anybody else on the call who wants to share a bit about how your partnerships are working? If anyone has any lessons learned as well based upon trying to build partnerships, but maybe them not going the way you wanted or something like that too, feel free to share.
This is Julie from SPRC. I just wanted to comment while people are continuing to think and type. 2 things. One is that I really appreciated some of what Jennifer and Elaine were saying, because one question that people frequently have is, okay, I have the partners, but how do I sustain that partnership after the grant is over? So those are very helpful reflections. I also wanted to mention 2 resources. One is the SPRC collaboration continuum, which is intended for folks. The origin was for folks who want to collaborate with substance abuse programs, but there are a lot of really great tools on it for any kind of collaborative work that folks might want to do, especially, the range from starting thinking about do we want to collaborate through on to kind of really forming strong partnerships. And then another one is called the collaboration multiplier, and it's just looking at, how folks who are collaborating can come together and kind of create more than just 1+1, how it really multiplies the impact that you're able to do. And it's a worksheet or a series of worksheets. So I thought that might be of interest to folks.
And Elaine, I see that you typed in. Do you want to share what you were?
Yeah, just saying that as we do our Suicide Prevention Council Summit, it is a meeting of people coming together and revisiting in the state plan and ongoing sustainability. But oftentimes we'll do it around the time of World Suicide Prevention Day and make it a big press event as well. So that kind of puts it out there and helps the state, people, just the general public around the state, reminds them that our suicide prevention efforts are ongoing and, continues to promote that awareness. And I think that kind of publicity also helps maintain the commitment of the people who are at the table, because it's like I said here, it's kind of like a wedding, you're saying your vows in front of everybody, so you got to kind of stick to it, but makes it a real commitment, a public kind of commitment to the work that we're doing. But publicity and press can really help with that.
Sure, that's great. One last opportunity for anybody that wants to chime in, maybe anyone that we haven't heard from yet.
Sheila, I also wanted to point to an interesting example that was mentioned in the sustainability report, which is one group had an IT organization, I believe, on their advisory board, and it's very interesting. It's just an example of not knowing where things are going to go or where your supporters might come from, where that IT group kind of took on ownership of an online piece of their program and really expanded it. And it was very exciting because that was just a very unexpected sector to take on that program. So you kind of never know which pieces are going to blossom.
Mm-hmm. Well, Julie, I can turn it back over to you if you want to do the next.
Sure.
Question.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Sheila. And I just wanted to say, Elaine and Jen, you're welcome to stay on, but don't feel like you need to, stay around for the rest of the event this afternoon. But we really, in either case, we just really wanted to thank you for participating this afternoon.
Well, thanks for the opportunity.
Same here. We appreciate being included. And I'll sign off.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
So you probably won't be able to sustain all the different aspects of your program, and so prioritizing is a really important piece. One way to get partners to help sustain the work is to get input about priorities, for current work and for going forward after the grant. I mentioned the IT example. They may have, offers of support that you hadn't even thought of. So one thing that Sheila alluded to and we sort of mentioned briefly last time is, really thinking about with these partnerships, what is it that they care about? how can you mesh with their priorities, and those the collaboration continuum that's up in the chat box has some helpful tools in relation to that, as well as the communication tools that we mentioned last time and sent out following the last webinar. And in terms of the importance of getting input from partners, I just wanted to share an example where one grantee came up with a sustainability plan regarding their enhanced case management. And they planned for the partner agency to take this on, including follow-up contact, but they didn't actually consult them first. So the partner agency didn't find this feasible, and the effort ended up falling apart when there was no one to transfer it to. So it just kind of highlights the importance of, getting that input and really getting the buy-in, getting them on board. So I wanted to bring up a quick poll here. Dominique, can you bring in the poll? In thinking about getting input on strategic directions from stakeholders or partners, how many of you have done this either through your grant or in a different area of work where you're sort of bringing a group together to really get their input on your work? And if you can go ahead and click yes or no on the poll, the top right-hand part of your screen, that would be great. So it looks like a bunch of people have done that. Some folks are still filling this in. And I'm curious, for those of you who have done this, how did you do it? What were some successes and some challenges? Because, we're asking folks to bring together your partners to give input about priorities and hopefully take on some pieces of the work going forward, but folks may be wondering how to do that, and so I know that there's a lot of great wisdom in the room. I wanted to ask folks, maybe they can share how they've done that and how some successes and lessons learned. I see a bunch of people are chatting in about how they got input. So I'm excited to hear. So Nicole wrote, Vermont has a coalition that meets quarterly, and in 2012 they wrote a state strategic plan. So Nicole, can you maybe, if you want to share aloud, can you ask what the process is for revising the state plan and for getting folks' input? Maybe get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty. You might be on mute.
I just unmuted myself. Was I
Okay.
successful?
Yes, you were. Great. Thank you.
Okay. So it was a lot more work the first time writing it. Obviously, revising it is less of a task than totally writing it the first time. And during our coalition meeting a couple weeks ago, we had everyone split up. It was like an afternoon activity. Everyone split up into the different 10 goals. And what we wanted to do was see about the goals, the objectives, and the strategies or action plans, how we wanted to revise them, and then compare them to the national strategy and see where we might be missing some factors or have some gaps that the national strategy did implement, because we, in 2012, were writing them simultaneously. So, we didn't have the input of the 2012 national strategy to put into the Vermont strategic plan. So this was an opportunity to kind of add that, update data, all of that. So the coalition split up into groups, have given us our input. We asked some members to kind of sign up as a work group to continue to be an advisement over the next couple months as we kind of spearhead it and then get their input.
Great. Thanks. So it sounds like you had maybe a little bit of a consensus process in those work groups or some kind of voting.
not exactly voting. They literally just crossed out, edited, gave input, and we're consolidating all of it.
Great. Thank you. Jonathan Williams chatted in that they've been fortunate to provide training sessions and offer feedback and include student interest. So the School of Business gave buy-in by offering an internship with a grade. That's great. And Rita Tybor chatted in that they started a suicide prevention coalition for community partners. Barbara Moser regularly seek input from Chancellor's Advisory Committee about the results of their work and the data, which is very interesting, and if they're moving in the right direction. And now wanting to take that, the questions about sustainability to that group and see who will step up and take on different parts. Do people have more questions about how to get input from partners and advisors, and what would be a helpful process? Do you have any challenges that you want to get the group wisdom about, or do you feel like you're in good shape to try and get some input from folks? So feel free to, even though the chat box says, how did you get input, feel free to chat that in there or speak aloud. I don't want to belabor the point if people feel like they're all set, but if this is something where people are like, oh, I'd really love to, hear more from the group about how to do this, and I want to give people that opportunity. I will also say that one example I heard regarding, this was actually regarding a state plan as well, but what they did is they sort of anticipated that there might be some dissonances between partners, and they prepared for that. So I think they sort of thought through, well, what level of input do we want? Who's going to be the final decision maker? How much weight are we going to give what they say, et cetera? Some people might sort of use like a SWOT analysis or, brainstorming list and checking things off, et cetera, et cetera. There are a whole host of different formats. It might be coming together in person. It might be, some sort of draft of priorities that get circulated via email, et cetera. Liz Brown says, I'd like to think we got lucky. A program that was already funded through the same grant reached out to us at the beginning of the grant and shared their successes and obstacles that they endured. Great. And Liz, do you want to share any, I'm not sure if you mean a program that was funded through the GLS grant. Do you want to unmute yourself maybe? Okay. And so was there any particular successes and obstacles that you would want to share from what you learned from them?
What we learned from the other program, our program is in an urban setting, and we serve Native Americans, and we were funded a GLS, and then there was a reservation not too far from us that was also granted the GLS as well, but they're on their second term or their second grant. And they came to us when we got at the beginning, and they just told us, this is what we went through. This is what you need to do. Since you guys are at the beginning, you need to, just go out everywhere and talk to these people. Just, get to know other organizations, and you need to, try to build a partnership. And they said that's what you need to do on the first year. Like they kind of, I like to think we got lucky because we didn't reach out to them. They came to us. And since they did that, I think that kind of helped us kind of see what they did so we can understand what we need to do. And that's exactly what we did during the first year. We ended up going out and we reached out to the community and tried our best to build out partnerships with other organizations. So I think with the advice that they gave us is helping us. So.
Great. And were there any particular lessons learned in terms of obstacles maybe that you encountered when you were doing that?
You know, the only obstacles that I face um, here and where I'm at is that I work in an urban setting. It's really broad, and it's a new program. Um, and so talking about suicide is kind of a stigma in my area. A lot of people are kind of
Mm-hmm.
scared to talk about it, or they kind of, veer away from me because, they think suicide's a bad thing. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to explain to them is what we're doing as a prevention strategy. It's no, we're not going to specifically, you know, tell everybody how people hurt themselves, but we're going to look out for the warning signs. So that's what we have to explain to the community. And since I've reached out to them and built a rapport with them, they're they're easing their way in, communicating with me if they need help. So, and our grant is written a little different than most as well. We do a lot of case management opposed to outreach. So,
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. Really appreciate it.
thank you.
So Barbara Moser's uh, chatting in also some interesting examples of how they get input and are sharing data and results and getting input with that, and also different processes from different departments so that they can mesh those with their processes. It's really great. So I'm going to keep going now, but if you do have other thoughts or comments, feel free to keep bringing them in. Actually, before I move on, I just had one more question. So sometimes I've heard that people might encounter partners sort of saying, well, we think that this should be your priority or this should be your priority, but they're not actually taking on any of the work themselves. I'm curious, how folks would deal with that, or maybe if you've already dealt with that, how you dealt with that. I see Barbara is typing in. And if folks have thoughts on that, feel free to unmute yourself and speak aloud as well. Very quiet. I don't know if this is maybe just something that people haven't encountered or they're not worried about or they're stumped by. Um, so yeah, partners have differing abilities to commit time. And the answer, one thing that occurs to me that might be helpful is just going back and revisiting and thinking, well, what are their priorities and what are your priorities and where do they overlap? And maybe, uh, homing in a little bit on those areas as places where they could help. Okay, so Nicole is saying that this is a little bit of a stumper. So if anyone has any ideas here. Anyone else? Maybe some folks who haven't spoken up yet? Okay, so Barbara's saying they take all suggestions, so then they would need to choose activities that they could reasonably accomplish and fit in with their plan. I think it's very reasonable. I think it's really an open question. How do you get folks who are very busy in between meetings to take on some of the work? And so it may be just hitting those areas where you can, or possibly scaling back, or what can you as staff do, or again, how can you mesh with their priorities to maybe move certain areas forward. I see a couple more folks are typing, so I'm just going to give it one more minute. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and move on, and if you do think of other ideas of how to approach that, feel free to keep typing in your suggestions as we go forward. So, Dominique, go ahead and you can take the poll away. And Leslie chatted in, oops, I think we lost that comment. We still have it behind the scenes. There we go. Thanks, Dominique. It's expected with nonprofits that many ideas will be shared, but we have to be strategic about our focus right now. Yeah, definitely. And so in thinking about prioritizing, that may be one of the criteria that come into play, is how much do you want to use as one of your prioritization criteria that, you know, that's on somebody else's agenda as well. You know, is that more likely to float it to the top of the pile where it's going to be more likely to get accomplished? So that's something to think about. But also, what are the other criteria? So is it something that's having a big impact? You know, for example, looking at your local evaluation data, your cross-site data, is it stuff that is wide-reaching? Is it stuff that's reaching a very high-risk group? You know, thinking through first, what are your criteria? And looking back at that big picture worksheet may help you think about what's working and what's not. So I have up the prioritizing your work worksheet. And in the workbook that hopefully you got a chance to look at, or sorry, the guide, it talks about, you know, coming up with your criteria for prioritizing. And you may want to do that with your partners, with your advisory group, or you may want to do that ahead of time, but to say these are our prioritizing criteria, and help us think through, you know, where this would fall for you in terms of these different aspects. And it has some suggestions in there of what some criteria might be. And so thinking back to the big picture worksheet in terms of what's working and what's not, you may want to share some of that information about where the momentum is, some of your impact data with your partners as you ask for their input on priorities and ask them to help take on pieces of the grant. And with this worksheet, if you fill this out before you meet with them, which you might do if you're not able to get folks together between today's meeting and our next meeting on August 5th, but you want to kind of still be able to try out filling in these worksheets, that's okay. You just may need to reprioritize a little bit after you've worked with them. And I just wanted to clarify a couple of points about filling out this worksheet. So what you see on your screen here is a couple of objectives as an example from Nevada. So first of all, if you identify something as a high priority, like this objective 2 that's written here, then you don't need to, so you can see in the middle, this is their screening program that they talked about last time, and they decided that this is a high priority to continue. So then you don't need to fill in this column at the right, or you can fill in NA. Sometimes people get a little bit confused about that. And you can see that their objective 6 down here, they've listed as a low priority. And the question to ask yourself then is, if it's a low priority, is this outcome, which in this case is identify and refer individuals at risk, is this being sufficiently addressed in other ways by other high priority objectives? So in this case, all three of these objectives have the same long-term outcome, which is identify and refer individuals at risk. So in the case of Objective 6, down here, this may already be sufficiently addressed by Objectives 2 and 5, which they have said are high priorities to continue. So it may not be necessary to keep focusing on trying to have this Objective 6, developing and implementing screening programs in primary care settings to continue at this point. And it's important to recognize that not all of your objectives may be able to continue. This is the point of prioritizing. At SPRC, we advocate for a comprehensive suicide prevention approach. And so it's not just addressing one risk factor, which in the case of the previous 3 objectives that we were looking at, they were all this one piece of a comprehensive approach, identifying individuals at risk and referring them. But it's really trying to, hit multiple points on this comprehensive approach. And it might be this comprehensive approach. You might have a different comprehensive approach that might include substance abuse prevention, for example. But if you just focus on one risk factor or one piece of this pie, you're going to not be as effective as if you approach it from multiple angles. So, so with this example, again, this one may not be as high of a priority, partly because that piece of the pie may already be addressed in other ways. 2 other types of objectives that you might be sort of wondering about how to enter into this sheet are with Objective 4 that they have listed, it's a low priority and the outcome is not sufficiently addressed by other objectives in their grant. So the outcome is provide quality mental health treatment to suicidal individuals, right, by training mental health providers in clinical approaches. So because it's not sufficiently addressed, we're going to keep working on it in the next session. In those steps, it could sort of use a new, more effective objective, possibly. And then some people also get a little bit caught up with this type of objective where for Nevada, at the time that they wrote this, this worksheet, they were just starting up this activity of meditation for active duty military and veterans. So some people might get a little caught up on, well, how do we figure out whether we're prioritizing this or not? How do we put this in the worksheet? Because we're just getting started. So they wrote, it's a low priority for the present, and they want to maintain this, but we're going to reevaluate it as the grant winds down. They were actually in year 3 when they wrote this, so they're going to revisit it later. And I didn't include this in the worksheet here, but they also described in the full example that's on the private pages how they were working with a partner on this who was interested in continuing to fund it if it were successful. So they weren't waiting till the last minute to figure out how they would sustain it if it were a priority, but they were going to revisit to see whether it was a priority and whether it was successful as the grant was more coming to an end. So I just wanted to also point out that after the prioritizing worksheet that we were just looking at, the next 2 worksheets are addressing gaps and a logic model, and those are really about strategic planning. The one after that is your action plan. So it's the ones that I've circled here in red. So 5A, 5B, and 6. It's those steps. So when you meet with your partners, you can also get input on those basic steps and ideas, even though we won't have gone through those worksheets yet. Um, so with strategic planning, are there things that aren't working well in critical areas, such as Nevada's effort to train mental health providers? And if so, how could they maybe change the effort so that it would work better? And how will you actually sustain what you prioritize? What are the strategies you're going to use? How can the partners help? And that will help to create the action plan in step 6 that will include your partner's offer. So as you're meeting with them, you're going to get their input about prioritizing and what pieces they might take on, but you're also going to be getting some ideas that will go into these later worksheets as well. So, write those down. We just weren't able to, get through all of these pieces before meeting with a partner, and we wanted to emphasize the key part around prioritizing and getting their buy-in. So any questions on the prioritizing worksheet and process? All right, well, we have a couple of minutes left. I was just curious if folks wanted to say anything about what was most surprising or confusing or helpful about today's session. Any other comments? All right, I think people are sort of mulling at this point. So I just wanted to say thank you to everyone and give a couple of reminders. So for homework, we're asking you to complete the Deciding Needs worksheet and the Prioritizing worksheet. And hopefully you've been able to be in touch with your partners and are going to be able to bring them together before completing the Prioritizing worksheet. And if not, don't worry, we can still sort of go through those with some ideas and examples. And you may need to go back and revisit before completing the prioritizing example with your partner's input. Next session, August 5th, you actually won't need to register again. Hopefully, I think we've fixed that glitch. There are going to be slightly different instructions on how to log in, and you'll be getting reminders of that because we're going to be breaking into small groups for part of the session so that the tribal grantees, campus grantees, and state grantees can kind of be in their own groups to talk about infrastructure development. And again, please exchange with your buddy site and do some of the pre-reading to look forward toward the next worksheets. Lastly, we'll have a short evaluation again coming your way, and we really do appreciate your feedback. So